is co-hosted by 100 Women in Finance, the global organization, CFA Institute, and also our society in Nigeria, CFA Society Nigeria. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our host today, Taiwo Okwor, who is the co-chair of the organization for Nigeria. Over to you, Taiwo.
Thank you, Olivier. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar titled Capital Formation, How Can Africa's Capital Market Work Better for Africa? It's my pleasure to welcome you today to this enriching conversation. My name is Taiwo Okwor and co-chair of 100 Women in Finance Nigeria. 100 Women in Finance is a global non-profit organization with a mission to strengthen women's presence in the global finance industry by empowering women to achieve professional success at every stage of their career. It's a volunteer-led organization and has over 80,000 members across the world. Olivia, if you don't mind moving the slides to the next page for me, please. Thank you. So, as I mentioned, the mission is to strengthen women's global presence, global finance industry, and with a vision 3040. This vision is essentially to ensure that women occupy 30% of senior investment roles and executive committee positions by 2040. Under one of its pillars of education and programming designed to broaden our members' perspective, enrich their knowledge, and gain insights, we're very delighted to host this webinar with the CFA Institute and also CFA Institute Nigeria. We're very delighted to partner with them. Furthermore, we'd like to express appreciation to the CFA Institute as well, who has kindly offered to give 15 scholarships for members of 100 Women in Finance Nigeria to complete the CFA program. So we really appreciated that. On this slide, just speaks to how the 100 Women in Finance operates. As I mentioned, it's a global organization. In Africa, there's a presence in Nigeria, Kenya, and also South Africa. We're very excited for what is coming in the next one hour. Moving on to the topic of today. According to the CFA Institute research report, private markets have shown resilience and adaptability in global financial landscape, making it a strong contender to address Africa's financing gaps. The research also suggests that private capital can play a significant role in sustainable capital formation and development in Africa, particularly in infrastructure development and SME funding. As we begin, I'd like to pose a question. How can we harness Africa's economic potential to drive sustainable development and improve lives of millions of people through development of capital market throughout the webinar? In this webinar, we're going to delve into different levels of information. Our experts as well are going to share their insights and also discuss actionable recommendations. Let's make this opportunity one to shape the future of Africa's economic landscape. Now I'll hand over to Olivier Finet, our moderator for the panel, to guide us through this discussion. Thank you very much for your presence, and let's get started. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Taiwo. I will now introduce a little bit you all to CFA Institute. Originally, my colleague Kasia Marianouk was supposed to provide this introduction. She is unable to make the call today due to personal circumstances, but I would recommend that you all reach out to Kasia and her colleague Kingston Wosu, both based in our London office, to discuss strategic partnerships and business development in the region. The two slides that you'll see next are about Institute itself. As you know, or if you don't know, we're going to tell you. Institute is the largest association of investment professionals in the world. We are also a global nonprofit organization, and our mission, which is very crucial to the quality of this work, is to lead this investment profession by promoting the highest standards of ethics, education, and professional excellence for the ultimate benefit of society. And those last 6 words are important for a work related to how capital markets can in fact yield socioeconomic progress. We are also a member organization who's funded exclusively through the contributions of its members and candidates. As you can see on this slide, it shows you where those members are located. We have over 200,000 members across the world and close to 3,000 on the African continent. It is important to state that over 150,000 candidates sit for the exam, the CFA exam, every year. The CFA program and charter is the centerpiece of our work to promote investment excellence around the world. It is the gold standard around the world as an investment credential. It provides for charter holders access to a prestigious network and acts as a global passport in every financial center in the world. This is how we participate in capital markets development around the globe. And this notion of passport is something that we've discussed a lot while we promoted this research in various parts of sub-Saharan Africa recently. In other words, it's a credential that you can use in an equal footing around the globe. We will now switch directly to the main part of this discussion today, the panel discussion on our recent piece called Capital Formation in Africa, a Case for Private Markets. And the way that this is going to work is I'll present, broadly speaking, the research, our intentions, and then we will introduce our panelists. And I will be asking a series of questions to the panelists to get into the details in different parts of Africa, but also to explain their perception and their experience taking part in this research. We have not started just recently looking at capital markets in Africa. The work has actually started in 2019. We released a collaborative piece with the Association of Stock Exchanges in Africa. This was rather a empirical research into the challenges and opportunities presented by capital markets in the region. Today, we are releasing a piece that is rather focused on the barriers and the policy recommendations that we can make to a series of institutions if we want to take capital market development to its next stage of development. We've partnered with a number of local authors, institutions, and our societies locally to make it happen. It is also very much a collaborative effort with our societies in the region, and especially those experts involved in advocacy and policy analysis. And we have created for that purpose the African Advocacy Council, made up of our 5 societies in the region. I would definitely recommend you get in touch with them if you want to discuss policy harmonization, regulatory convergence, barriers, or ideas for future policy work. We have contact details in every one of those societies. This work was also a way for us to establish key relationships at an institutional level. And for this piece of research, we've secured forwards by important people in the institutional sphere, starting with Dr. Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, former Deputy President of the Republic of South Africa. She was very keen to take part, as this concept of how capital markets can participate in socioeconomic progress was very close to her heart. We've also teamed with the African Development Bank, and in particular, Mr. Ahmed Rashad Atout, who leads the Financial Sector Development Department at the AFDB. Both provided very much appreciated support for the promotion and deployment of this research effort. And you can find all the details on this research on a specific and dedicated webpage on our Research and Policy Center website. You can find there videos with each of the authors, summary of our roundtable and event in Abidjan as part of the recent annual meeting of the African Development Bank Group. I would now like to introduce you to our panelists today, and I would ask you all if you could please turn your cameras so that people can see you. I will name you all, and then we will get into the meat of this discussion. Starting with Alan Witabe in Uganda. Alan is a CFA charter holder, and he's the Director for Investments at the Deposit Protection Fund of Uganda. We also are pleased to have with us Tendai Namo, Managing Director for Imara Corporate Finance in Zimbabwe. We also have with us today Dr. Patrick Omorui Iki, Associate Professor at the Department of Finance at Lagos State University in Nigeria, Mr. and Dr. Oki Umeano, Deputy Director for Financial Markets at the Central Bank of Nigeria. Also with us today, very happy, my colleague Phoebe Chan, who's a capital markets policy specialist at CFA Institute based in the London office, and myself, who will be moderating today's panel discussion. I lead advocacy and policy research at CFA Institute. This will be your panel today, and the way that this will work is we'll go through a series of slides, and I'll be asking questions of our panelists along the way. So first of all, why did we engage in such a research? I think primarily our objective was, at least from my perspective, was to establish a connection between capital market development and economic development. We wanted to establish and show that we can count on an expert network. And for that purpose, what we did is we identified barriers to capital formation and key policy recommendations. On your screen, you see my dear friend Alan Witabe in Uganda. And Alan, I'm very happy to say and proud to say, was at the very origin of this work. And probably we could say, Alan, that you provided us with the genesis to what turned out to be this piece of work. Would you like to provide us your perspective here, Alan? Why did you think it was important to start working on the concept of capital formation in the region, please?
Hi, everybody, and Olivier, how are you doing? It's a pleasure to be here to speak to this very esteemed audience and to share perspectives around capital formation. And just to answer your question, my inspiration really started around 2020, 2019. I was reading a piece, a CFA Institute piece, an article, I believe it was either Norway or Sweden, where they had written a piece about capital formation. And it intrigued me because I was having these challenges in my jurisdiction of Uganda, where I was working at the central bank as the head of foreign reserves management. And we were trying to think about why is it that a lot of risky capital was foreign and domestic capital was extremely conservative. And so we were seeing situations where wherever there was a new innovation, there was a startup, there was a venture that needed risky capital, it was more likely that this capital will come outside our jurisdiction, and it was unlikely that a local pension fund, a local endowment, high net worth individuals in our country will participate in these riskier capital ventures. And so the piece that was written by CFA Institute from the Scandinavian experience gave a name to the problem. And so that's when I understood that the challenge we were looking at could be deemed as capital formation. And so I started asking questions internally to my colleagues in the society in East Africa, but of course, much later as we interacted with the CFA Institute, we asked the question, what can we do for East Africa to broaden and deepen capital formation? And the idea was, how do we support policymakers in East Africa? How do we support asset owners like pension funds to increase the use of domestic capital to take on risky investments? And that was really the genesis of this piece. And of course, as we deepened our conversation, it became quickly apparent that this was a universal problem across the continent. And perhaps it was important for us to take a continental view instead of a country-specific view. And so along the journey from 2021, we started expanding the team, exploring and looking at what other jurisdictions were experiencing. And as we had this conversation, it became apparent that the problem was not just a Ugandan problem. It wasn't a Kenyan problem. It wasn't a Tanzania problem. It was prevalent across the continent that many of our jurisdictions, we experience this issue. A lot of the capital that is funding our growth, a lot of the capital that is funding our vision is driven by foreign players, and the foreign players usually come with conditions, and sometimes they influence our visions in a different direction. And I'll share an example. Uganda for a long time was relying on capital from the United States, both for public sector and private sector growth. And from around 2019, we put in place a law against the LGBTQ agenda at the time. And a lot of the capital was withdrawn, both from the public sector. A lot of capital was withdrawn that was going towards budget support. And then we also saw a lot of exits in our startups. We saw exits in infrastructure, and a lot of disbursements were cancelled. And this was across board from the IMF, the World Bank, venture capital funds, and the United States government as well. And of course, much later, we saw some of the European governments also following suit and withdrawing capital. And so as we went into COVID, it became very apparent that a lot of the growth of our country, the growth of our region had been reliant on capital external to us. And when that capital was pulled back, the gap could not be addressed by domestic capital. So it became important that we needed to sit and diagnose what the challenge was. And the challenge that we managed to highlight was that there were issues at the public policy level. Public policy did not fully appreciate the importance of growing a private sector and growing private markets. And so we noticed that in Uganda in particular, our government, whenever they write a new law around capital markets, fund management, they will earmark and they will block off a portion of assets to be allocated to government or fixed income assets. And so that meant that there was limited funding available for private markets, for venture capital from the larger asset owners, like the mandatory Social Security Fund, the endowment funds that are government-driven, the Sovereign Wealth Fund. All these are protected in a way that the funds are earmarked for the state, and there's limited funding available to the private sector. So all these things together really brought home the importance of discussing and preparing a research piece that articulates what the problem is for Uganda, for East Africa, but I believe it's relevant across the continent. And so we needed a grounding. But I close by just sharing one more thing, Olivier, that I've been in the public sector space, writing and supporting the writing of financial sector regulations. And one of the things that I know from my work is that public policy requires an authentic research piece on which to base the formulation of rules and regulations that affect public policy. And so with this particular piece, we have created the evidence that we can use to foster discussions with our ministers of finance, with our ministers of capital markets, with our chief executives of capital markets, of the pension sectors, to discuss what are these barriers and how best to unlock. And of course, in part of this piece, we're also learning from each other, because different African countries are at different levels of development. Mauritius is slightly ahead of Uganda, and we believe some solutions may be already in Mauritius that perhaps we could use and adopt in Uganda. So I'm very happy with this piece, that the journey that we have taken the last 4 years has given us detailed and authentic pieces of information that we can use to continue the conversation at the public policy level on how we can unlock domestic capital to take on the domestic opportunities that we have in the private markets. Olivier, permit me to stop here. Perhaps if there is a follow-up question, I could speak to that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. And I think you're absolutely right. What we, in the end, aim for this piece to be is a bridge between government, regulators, and the private sector, in finding solutions, concrete solutions that are accepted by all as progressive and helpful for capital market development. I would also like to mention to you all to use the chat box that you see at the top of your screen here and put in your questions in there. We will have a Q&A session right after this panel, and I'll go through those questions and direct them to panelists as appropriate. So do use the chat box that you see at the top of your screen and log your questions in there. So as Alan was saying, the piece in the end reviews those barriers, and we went through 11 different jurisdictions. My colleague Phoebe will go through those details in a second. The idea was very much to generate a top-down meets bottom-up kind of research, because we wanted to obtain information from people who are in the market, active in their relevant market, as opposed to looking at those markets from afar, from London or New York. So those barriers are very much anchored in the practice that those authors have been experiencing as local practitioners. We come up with policy recommendations in this research. We provide a historical linkage, which is very important, between this concept of capital formation and socio-economic development, because one cannot go without the other, or rather, we do not think that capital market development should be disassociated from the sought socio-economic development that should arise. We do provide a comparison with the Asian tigers in the Asia Pacific region, and then we have a collection of 11 country chapters for everyone to look at the details. So this is how the report is structured. On the next slide, you will see the 11 countries in questions, from Botswana to West Africa, Central Africa. You see the map. What we tried is to have a reasonably good representation of the continent. And at that stage, I would like to turn to my colleague Phoebe in London, who has been instrumental in making this complex work a reality. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience, Phoebe, how easy or not so easy it has been to coordinate teams of around, if I'm correct, 25 different authors distributed amongst those 11 countries, and also what it brought in terms of quality to the overall product here. Over to you, Phoebe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivier, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Phoebe, and I'm very glad to be part of the discussion today. As introduced by both Olivier and Alan just now, we adopted a collaborative approach at the very beginning of this project, as we recognize the need to understand and address capital formation issues across such a vast and diverse continent. So you see on the screen, we brought together a diverse team of over 25 authors, contributing from 11 different jurisdictions, including Botswana, Ethiopia, Kenya, Mauritius, of course, Nigeria, Uganda, Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and also West Africa. So you see the screen, the locations of these markets. They are pretty much geographically diverse and dispersed. And for each chapter, we invite the authors who are recognized for their deep and on-the-ground expertise, and trust them with producing the content that reflects local realities. To me, this was pretty much a testament to the approach which combines regional cooperation and local expertise. And I'm very glad that it has yielded rich via market-specific insights. And I would say it wasn't just a research paper, but also a collaborative effort involving the esteemed panelists you see on the screen from both academia and also the industry, who are at the same time embedded in their respective capital and financial ecosystems. And of course, coordinating such a large and geographically dispersed group presents some challenges. Specifically, we had to leverage the complexity of liaising with 11 different markets, each with very distinct pace of market development as introduced by Alan just now, and also varying institutional and financial capabilities, and often the dominating currencies are also different. So this also brings to the point of data inconsistency, because when we are analyzing the markets with their respective ministries of finance and statistical bureaus, their fiscal policies and indicators will be different. So it requires a lot of standardization, cross-referencing, and careful interpretation to ensure that the comparability of our findings across the continent are there. And also, the language differences were something that we had to consider as well, particularly with our focus on West Africa and the French-speaking countries. So therefore, our promotional video, which was also launched alongside the publication, was produced in French in order to cater this diversity. And overcoming these logistical and cultural nuances required a consistent effort, coordination among different teams and stakeholders, and a deep recognition for the local context. And I'm very glad that we have adopted a flexible, adaptable approach, which combines, as Olivier said, the top-down and also bottom-up perspectives. So essentially, there is top-down support and guidance from us, from CFA Institute, providing the direction, to ensure the consistency in terms of the scope, the themes, the questions that we ask, as well as the analytical framework. So it did help us maintain a unified and coherent narrative across all the markets. And at the same time, the bottom-up contributions were equally important, because they ensure the research wasn't just theoretical, but it was deeply rooted in the specific market, in the nuances, realities of each market. So the authors, they shared the insights on the local challenges, they brought forward the unique examples, and therefore the tailored solutions that a pure decentralized approach might actually have missed. So I would say ultimately, this dual approach did create a more robust, comprehensive body of work, and this coordination actually fostered a growing network, not just within CFA Institute, but actually across the continent. And just like what we are doing now with 100 Women in Finance and Societies to create a foundation for future research and knowledge sharing. Thank you very much, Olivier, and the panel.
Thank you very much, Phoebe. I have to say this has been a very complex piece of work, but at the same time as well, from complexity, you get a lot of rewarding benefits, and you've expressed in a very articulate manner the quality that has emerged from this collaborative effort. We will now switch to some high-level observations from our research, and I will then question our various authors in two specific jurisdictions, in Nigeria, but also in Zimbabwe, to provide perhaps more specific observations as pertains to their local jurisdiction in the context of those broader observations, right? So on the left-hand side, you can see the main 6 barriers that we have identified throughout the country chapters. And on the right-hand side, you can see important policy recommendations that we've all agreed should be made prominently in terms of the messaging back to institutions, the industry, regulators, and governments. And it has been mentioned a few times already, but small and medium enterprises are very much the backbone of any economy's development. And it has been found quite often that there is limited structural support for that part of the economy. Linked to that, constraints in fundraising options, insufficient range of financial products, inconsistency of policies across the region that goes to regulatory convergence, divergence, or harmonization, depending on the angle you take to this question, limited investor education, and in general underdeveloped financial infrastructure. These were the main barriers that we have identified most of the time from the country chapters. In terms of recommendation, of course, top of the list would be enhance the clarity and the predictability of regulation across the region. We need rules on private markets in order to develop those private market channels. Private markets, private equity, private credit have been identified often as a very valid source of funding for the new economy. And in the case of Africa, for family businesses that may not necessarily want to go public too soon, for example. We need standardized corporate governance rules. We need to get better at using public-private partnerships. We need more coordination between private and public spheres in order to produce rules that are accepted by all and as meaningful. And we probably need government-sponsored educational programs. We definitely need some level of focus on SMEs. So these were largely the high-level observations made in this report. And I'd like to turn maybe to our friend Tendai in Zimbabwe. Perhaps, Tendai, you could tell us about your experience and maybe how do these observations resonate since you worked on the country chapter dedicated to Zimbabwe. Can you provide a little deeper understanding or evocation of those issues as they pertain to your own jurisdiction, please? Over to you, Tendai.
All right, thank you so much, Olivier. Greetings, everyone. I'm sorry I have a bit of flu. So, looking at Zimbabwe, it is a very unique country in the sense that the statement that says once beaten, twice shy. In Zimbabwe, unfortunately, we've gone through rounds of being beaten. So you find that you are looking at an economy where people have lost trust in the system. You have a disjointed savings culture. So when you look at just the fundamental definition of a capital formation, where you have savings, you mobilize and you invest. Now in Zimbabwe, because people saw themselves losing their pensions, in 2008, people saw themselves, unable to access US dollars in the financial institutions. People now prefer to hold on to hard currency as opposed to financial instruments. You have a situation where when you look at even the pension funds themselves, asset management, insurance companies, broadly, you are looking at over 80% invested, mainly in real estate and listed entities, listed equities. The reason being, people are looking for ways in which they can hedge against inflation. They still remember the hyperinflation days. You have a situation where people want predictability to say, even if currency changes, they still know that at the end of the day, we will not go back to what happened in the past. So when you look at Zimbabwe now, from the private markets perspective, even looking at private equity, you find that whilst the regulator gives the allowance increase up to 15%, you would find that players in the market may invest maybe up to 3%, some 8%, simply because there are other issues around valuation issues. You are looking at just the opaqueness, and you are also looking at saying the capital markets, what are the exit mechanisms? In Zimbabwe at present, we have a multi-currency regime that is set to expire in 2030, the official use of the US dollars. So you find that when it comes to even private debt itself, you find that the suppliers of the debt are not so willing to extend it beyond 2030. So you already have a timing problem where it's up to 5 years, and some will give you 1 year and then you roll over. But looking at our economy, the fact that 70% is almost informalized, you find that these people need pension capital, but the suppliers of capital are not willing to extend beyond 2030 because of just the issues around policy inconsistencies, etc. So in Zimbabwe, those issues really are what are sort of like barriers to capital formation. It's a trusting issue. It's because we've been through a lot. But just looking at the policy recommendations, I believe the issue on what can we do, looking at the SMEs, I think it's very critical and pertinent. I like what my previous colleague shared, Alan, to say this research really was to say we are pulling together people in different markets to say, okay, so what can we do? Learning in from their own experiences. But from Zimbabwean perspective, it is really more of a policy issue, confidence, trust. That is really where, the private people are trying to see what can we do with the savings. But broadly, that's what I can share concerning Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much, Tendai. We'll get back to you later on in this discussion. Of course, today we also wanted a point of view on the specific jurisdiction of Nigeria, and we're very happy to have with us today two of the authors responsible for the Nigeria chapter in this research, Dr. Oke Umeano and Dr. Patrick Iki. And so both, if you can unmute yourselves first, and then tell us if those high-level observations resonate with what you've observed in the jurisdiction. Maybe delve a little deeper into the specific issues that pertain to Nigeria. Maybe if we start with you, Patrick, and then we'll go to Dr. Oke Umeano.
Thank you. For Nigeria case, the issue to really look at is the SMEs. Why we need to ask this question? Why this particular question? Why is the SME not assessing the SME that is the backbone of the economy, part of employment, poverty reduction, and then societal welfare, whatever? Why is the SME not assessing the capital market? That is applying the alternative securities market is designated really for the SME, because we are particularly with SME as it is in other markets. So that is the reason that is the major which we need to unlock, because the banks, as you know, they are commercial in nature. So looking at what can help to increase the level of capital formation, so that the level of infrastructure, private infrastructure, and support the productivity and growth, and then support the society at large. So the issue is clear, is that the issue of loans. The SMEs approaching the banks for their finance need rather than capital market, because we know that, as I said, the banks are there for commercial purpose and not for investment. So what we need, the problem with Nigeria, as I said, that SMEs are not attractive. They are not accessing capital. They are not accessing capital on the capital market. They go to the bank. So that is an area, apart from all other issues that also cut across other markets, all the challenges that are out there.
Patrick, I'm sorry to interrupt, Patrick. I think a lot of people are struggling to hear you. Is there any way that you can maybe speak either louder or closer to the mic?
All right. It's okay. Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Go ahead. Can you hear me better?
Yes.
Can you hear me better, please? All right. As I said, I started with saying the Nigerian market is just, not too different from all other markets in Africa, except that because of our population, because of our level of need for capital in terms of the SME, which is the backbone of the economy. The SME controls about 80% of employment needs, 80% of poverty reduction, and other societal needs. So it's a focus, it's a place for focus. So the capital they need should be through the securities market, that is alternative securities market. That is what the capital market industry designated for for SME growth. Rather, the SME, they rather go to the banks. And we know that the banks in Africa, Nigeria, due to their colonial heritage or whatever, they are more of a commercial nature rather than industrial nature, industrial inclined banks rather than commercial inclined banks rather than industrial inclined banks. So there's that gap. That is the problem. That is the fundamental problem of financial development in Nigeria, in Africa. So an SME are key into it. So that's why you see, and this problem resonates in other problems. You know, as far as the finance development connection is concerned. So we need to go into reasons why SMEs are not accessing capital, industrial capital from the capital market, particularly the alternative market, rather than alternative securities market, rather than going to the banks, because the banks will not meet their finance needs. So apart from that challenge, we also highlighted other challenges, which in our paper, the issue of underdevelopment, dominated market, fundraising, debt rather than equity. Then
I'm sorry, Patrick. If you don't mind, I'm very sorry to interrupt again. We are struggling to hear you. I'm very embarrassed, I have to say that, but if we could maybe switch to Dr. Oke-Umeanu and test if your connection is better. Patrick, I'm sorry about that, but we were struggling to hear you. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Oke. If you have something to add about Nigeria, please.
Yeah, thank you, Olivier. I hope I'm a bit more audible than Dr. Eke.
Yes, we can hear you better.
Okay. First, I apologize for my video. I see that is a bit dark. I guess it's the shade in my office. Okay, so I'll first say thank you, Olivier, for all the hard work in getting this work across the line, and also to Phoebe and every other person at the Institute who worked on this. I'll just quickly say that a lot of the problems we have with capital formation in Nigeria is cultural. We rightly wrote in the work, there are issues around financial education. We still have people who go through school without getting good financial education, because it's just recently we started adding that to the basic studies in Nigeria. So people who create businesses sometimes do not even know that they can access capital, and those who have disposable income don't even know that they can where they can invest. So there's that gap in education. The other one is that we have issues around things around culture and religion. Some cultures say no to debt. Some religions also say no to things around debt and interest, and that sort of hurts capital formation in Nigeria. Then there's also the issue of the difficulty of which was what I think Dr. Eke was talking about, of SMEs accessing the organized market. When you look at the minimum amount for capital raise and the effort it takes, the cost of raising capital from the public market, it's quite high for smaller businesses. So that sort of excludes them. And finally, we have this very large or very deep, crowding out of the private sector from the bond markets in Nigeria, which is as a result of the fact that the government borrows a lot from the bond market. So if you combine all these factors, it ends up meaning that smaller businesses find it difficult to raise funds. However, there are a lot of other ways that funds are being raised. There are some good things happening on the cooperative side. In Nigeria, there's this large financial sector called cooperatives, where in places of work, in places of abode, people come together to put pool capital, and that capital ends up funding small businesses. So that works. in Nigeria, even though it is not very well, I would say very well organized, but it still works. So that sort of bridges the gap for very small businesses. And we are beginning to see a lot of, private capital working here. Someone gave it a name, that's rotating credit schemes. So there's a lot of it in Nigeria. And there are these private investors and private capital that is really pervasive now in Nigeria, which is a sort of bridging that gap. However, the gap still remains. For a typical business owner in Nigeria, the biggest problem is raising funds. The banks lend, of course, very short tenured financing because of the asset liability, asset liability matching. So you can't really blame the banks. While a small business needs long-term capital, with which to survive and scale. So there's that mismatch into which we are seeing private capital coming. So there's that growth of private equity companies, there's angel investors and all that. However, there's also a problem there. The problem is how certain businesses can meet with these people. How certain is so that there comes that bridge. But we are seeing a lot of effort being made by everybody, like what you're doing now. Many groups are coming up and setting up forums, setting up conferences where these two place of scarcity and place of surplus of capital meet. So these things are problems we have, and normal problems you have in developing economies. And of course, they are in our country. So we are seeing that. And I want to also say that the regulators are seeing that too. I used to work at the SEC. The SEC has, continued to encourage that sector, that part of the capital of the market, trying to, sort of give some level of organization to capital for that segment of market that cannot really access the public markets. So that's one of the things that is happening. And then there needs to be a lot of investor education. A lot is being invested in investor education, to bridge that education gap. And then finally, the cultural gap, religious gap is being taken care of by the introduction of some non-interest products. There's that significant growth in non-interest financial market products now in Nigeria, where people who have those constraints around interest and around debt can actually invest, and that capital can also go to businesses that have such constraints. So I would think that the problem we have in Nigeria with capital raising is the kind of problem you have in a typical developing economy of our time, and there are things being done to bridge those gaps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Umeanu, and thank you as well, Dr. Patrick Iki. Sorry for the technical glitches, but I would encourage you all to take a look at the country chapters in the research and contact directly Dr. Patrick Iki and Dr. Umeanu if you have further questions. We are getting near the end of this session, and what I wanted to mention as well is that we have released and premiered this research at the recent annual meeting of the African Development Bank. And from our various conversations there, from the sessions that we attended at the AFDB annual meeting, the key term that transpired in all those conversations was this concept of capacity building. And from our perspective, capacity building is a combination of factors, from human capital development, which we will discuss in a second. Phoebe was mentioning research, data, knowledge management. This was mentioned very often, lack of comparable and reliable sources of data in the region. We need to start systematizing policy advocacy around harmonizing policies and regulation in the region. We need, as far as we're concerned, to demonstrate that we have access to a local expert network through our CFA societies. and we need to start building better institutional relationships. So when you take all of that together, this is what we mean by capacity building. But I would like to ask, and because today's webinar is co-hosted with 100 women in Africa, there's also this human capital element that we are very keen to spend a bit of time on. And so I wanted to ask Tendai if she has some thoughts on the particular role that women can play, but also younger generations in this development. Is there a particular role or a particular responsibility that can be assigned to women, and what can we expect from younger generations as this capital formation, capital development needs to work for them, as they are the future of the African economy? Tendai, is this something you'd like to comment on? Human capital development, role of women, role of the younger generation, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Olivier. So for me, just looking at human capital, looking at the skills, the education that one has, this asset is very critical, and it needs to adapt with changing market environments. So now when we are I'm gonna combine it with the role of women. I'm just looking at myself as a female leader, and the fact that in the finance industry, you find that it still remains more of a boys' club. You have fewer women occupying senior positions. But one of the things that I realize that is important is that we need to be people that add value. You know, when you're sitting around the table, you're discussing an important conversation. As long as it has got depth, it does not really matter whether the gender. So what it means now for me, the human capital development, is to ensure that we come up with ways that uplifts the younger generation of girls, ladies that are coming up, to upskill, to ensure that their skills are moving in line with what is happening. I just want to give a small example of how I started out in my career. I joined a Big Four audit firm. So I was coming off from university. Straight off, I didn't know much, but they had a structured learning program that you knew that at this level, technically, you're supposed to know this. From a soft skills perspective, this is what you need. And what really helped me at the time was also that you had a mentor that you sit down with after every 6 months to say, you know what, this is where I am. I believe I need to work on this. So for me, I believe that as women in finance, even as the younger generation, we need those educational programs that empower them, that upskill them so that they reach their potential. And I just want to say, you know, how I am part of this conversation is that whilst I did CFA, I volunteered. An opportunity arose to contribute to a research. So I raised up my hands to contribute. So if we are able to then harness and ensure that at every level, the young ones that are coming up, they are involved in the discourse, it actually helps them. We talk about the issue to do with SME. We know some banks are not actually offering money to this sort of space. So what can we do? How do we upskill people, advisors at every level to understand the pertinent issues that affect the SMEs, so that when we are then dealing with them, we have the required knowledge that is actually needed to address them. So this is just what my small contribution.
No, thank you very much, Tendai. This is actually the crux of the matter, really. And at the AFDB annual meeting, an interesting statistic that I think maybe we all knew but forgot is that Africa is the region in the world that concentrates the youngest population in the world on average, which means this is the continent of the future in terms of demographics. We've got to make sure that this future works for those younger generations. Unfortunately, we will not have enough time for questions and answers. This says a lot about my poor qualities as a moderator, but I would still like to ask maybe Taiwo, if you could come in and close this very interesting conversation. Perhaps if you can provide, Taiwo, your perspective from your organization here. You've heard a number of the themes and the topics that have been raised by the various speakers. We've heard about SMEs a lot. We've heard about education a lot. We've heard about the need for governments to get together and align policies with their economic development needs. What is your perspective on the comments that have been made so far, and maybe your closing argument, please?
Thank you, Olivier. Very, very interesting session. And I think everyone would agree that it's been an enriching and engaging session. I definitely took a lot from it, pretty much providing perspective across the continent. It's not every time you get to be involved, participate in a session whereby you have panelists and experts providing actual, the realities of how things work in their, in their sphere of influence or space, to say specifically. So it's been, very engaging and educative 1 hour. So I think for me, just to close out, I would say that the conversation has been, very helpful, being able to harness some of the economic potential of Africa to be able to drive through growth through private markets. In my own space where I work, it's really infrastructure development in the continent. So it really lies close to my heart. It's also, I think also emphasizes the point that there is a strong correlation between availability of capital and socio-economic development. You can't deny that. When there's capital available, you put capital to work, and then you can see the results through, improved economic growth, GDP, reduction in poverty, etc. So this really, strikes a note. I think while there are a number of challenges, which was highlighted in the report, I think there are also a number of opportunities, right? Opportunities to turn the clock back, or opportunities to move forward and do things right. In the report, you spoke about recommendations for the regulators, policymakers, for governments, etc. For the audience, if you haven't read the report, I will really encourage you to read the report. It's actually well written. It's not like it's a 1,000 page. So please do peruse this very important report by the CFA Institute. From 100 Women in Finance, I mentioned during my opening that we are, one of our pillars is, education. Educating members to broaden their perspective, to be able to develop critical insights into issues that matter. And this is one of the issues that matters, that affects the Africa continent. So we are very happy to collaborate with the CFA Institute, CFA South Nigeria. I see more opportunities for collaboration to deepen that, and also impact. Impact is the other pillar as well, because with this, you can have impact to, improve the lives of millions of Africans, because like you said, it's the future. So I think in closing, thank you. I want to say thank you for everyone taking 1 hour of your time on this Wednesday afternoon to participate and, listen to this very educative session, a very collaborative session. And please watch out for more events like this. And thanks again for joining us. Pleasure.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Tai.